Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Our final segment, this is our November 11th program, taped here on the afternoon of Friday, November 11th, 2011. It is Veterans Day, Armistice Day originally. The end of World War I on the Western Front, and we're also coming now to the 70th anniversary of the Pearl Harbor attack. And I am, as perhaps people know, preparing a major book-length study which will be coming out from Progressive Press in the near future, perhaps not quite in time for December 7th, but I think a pre-order will be available now in a week or two, although the time of publication is a little bit uncertain for some reasons, good ones. Let's look back now at this Pearl Harbor question, because it leads also to the larger question of the faulty conduct of World War II, which is, I think, a very big question. I mean, it's so honeycombed with problems. You look at, for example, the Allied attack on Italy in 1943-44. Why start at the bottom of the Italian boot under the leadership of Field Marshal Alexander of the British, and then fight all the way up this long peninsula, when anybody in his right mind would say, make your landing at the base of the peninsula and cut off all the enemy forces that are in the peninsula, and on and on. Why the delay of the Second Front? Why the wrong targeting? Why do terror bombing of German residential areas instead of precision bombing of the factories that actually produced war equipment? The answer is because they were owned by Henry Ford and other people with big influence in the U.S. government. Now, when you get to Pearl Harbor, you're dealing with three levels. You're dealing with the official version, which is that this was a surprise attack and that Admiral Kimmel, Admiral Block, and General Short were incompetent. They didn't provide reconnaissance and alert status. That latter part is true. But the official version is faulty because it doesn't recognize the fact that there's also a conspiratorial element involved, which is the people in Washington: Stimson, Marshall, Richmond K. Turner, John J. McCloy, Robert Lovett, a lot of heavies of the later Wall Street establishment. But then there's a reactionary version, the reactionary or libertarian or pro-fascist version. This is all the same, which is that somehow Pearl Harbor is a conspiracy by Franklin D. Roosevelt, and that he wants the attack to occur, he forces it to occur, he provokes Japan, and then when the attack is coming, he makes sure that these wonderful commanders are denied the intelligence that they would need in order to mount a successful defense. This is also a big lie. So you're dealing with two big lies. You're dealing with the official version, which is what generally the history books say, and then the reactionary, libertarian, or pro-fascist version of events, which is also a lie. So I've tried to intervene in this in order to provide what I believe to be the truth. The first thing that you've got to remember is that there is a question of something called fascism, which most of these books, the overwhelming majority of Pearl Harbor studies, simply ignore. They don't face the fact that there is this thing called the Axis, which is the Rome-Berlin-Tokyo axis, and that Japan, perhaps by itself not the greatest threat, but combined with Germany and indeed Italy, becomes a very, very serious threat, and that fascism had a great potential to rule the world, not necessarily through direct military victory in what you might think of the usual sense, but because of the deep sympathy of the wealthy ruling classes, the bankers and top industrialists all across the world. Their sympathy for fascism was simply overwhelming. And the case in point is the fall of France in 1940. So therefore, a political study. Most of the time, we're told to look at people like Marshall, look at Stimson, look at Short, look at Block, look at Kimmel. with no idea that these people have a political identity. That is, they represent a political point of view which influences what they do. And instead, that's exactly what you've got to do. So after having taken the political approach to 9/11, we might say, I now attempt to take the political approach to Pearl Harbor. Now, in the background, the hostility of Wall Street to Franklin D. Roosevelt is implacable. It is unforgiving. It is sustained. It doesn't go away. If you don't understand this, you absolutely cannot make sense of any of these events. It means that, in particular, at this point, the reactionary, fascist, or libertarian view is absolutely misleading. Let's just look at the hostility of Wall Street to Franklin D. Roosevelt, because this is the series in which Pearl Harbor is inserted. Pearl Harbor is on one level, a document of how much Wall Street hated FDR, and we'll show you why. In 1933, before Roosevelt was inaugurated, there is an attempt to kill him. It's about 3 or 4 weeks before the inauguration. The usual demented loner, in this case the mentally challenged anarchist, Italian anarchist Giuseppe Zangara is the person who tries to kill Roosevelt in Miami, Florida, and the bullets go astray and they kill Mayor Chernak of Chicago, very important figure in the National Democratic Party, would help Roosevelt to get elected. He was, I think, probably a target in his own right, although Roosevelt was the main target. So that assassination attempt is frustrated. Then in 1934, we have the entire Smedley Butler story. We have the revelations from the Dick Stein Committee and from journalists like Seldes and Spivak at the time, that there's a Morgan coup, that the House of Morgan sends out operatives to contact people like Smedley Butler and presumably others to try to get them to lead a march on Washington along the same lines as Mussolini's 1922 March on Rome, that they want to take Roosevelt prisoner, they want to keep him as a prisoner in the White House, and they want to impose on him a Secretary of General Affairs who would essentially become the Prime Minister, really running the government, while Roosevelt might be allowed to stay on as a kind of figurehead. That was 1934, and this fails because of the refusal of Butler in particular, and Butler's courage in pointing out what was happening. There's also, in the works of a guy called Higham, Higham, there's another coup. This one it involves, on the one hand, anti-communist Russian emigres, the so-called white Russian emigre community, joining with disgruntled military figures, a guy called Van Horn Moseley. Van Horn Moseley had been the supply officer for Pershing at the Chaumont headquarters. He's part of the Chaumont clique of Pershing in France during World War I, U.S. Expeditionary Force. And this Van Horn Moseley is recruited together with a group of Russians in Russian emigres in Connecticut, that they're going to mount a coup and take over the White House and presumably eliminate Roosevelt physically. Then there is the political challenge mounted by the Liberty League and then in particular the America First group, with their spokesman Charles Lindbergh, who, as Roosevelt considered him to be a Nazi, to be a fascist. And I think there is a very strong case in this regard that Lindbergh is somebody who believes in the conceptual underpinnings of Nazism and fascism, believes deeply in racist or race-based explanation of world history. He thought that the war was flawed because it did not array the whites against the non-whites. He wanted to reform the conduct of the Second World War, saying that the Orientals, the Russians, the Chinese, and the Japanese are the real enemies, and instead we've got a mixed front. So he didn't want it. And above all, he identified Western civilization with Nazism. This is absolutely inadmissible. So that was 1940 into 1941. Then we have the Pearl Harbor attack, and then we have what looks very much like the assassination of Roosevelt. Won't go through the details now, just mention that Stalin told Elliot Roosevelt, Generalissimo Stalin of the Soviet Union, told Roosevelt's son Elliot in 1946, "Your father was poisoned, murdered by the Churchill gang, and they poisoned him, and they're trying to poison me, Stalin." So we'll try to devote at least one segment per show now, and hopefully more as we go towards December 7th and then towards the end of the year. We've just scratched the surface. And again, if you watch the Progressive Press website, and you'll get news of when this might be coming out. And I'll have more to say about it in coming weeks. So we hope you keep up on top of